Well, welcome everybody to St Ninian's Cathedral for this talk and discussion this afternoon. The heating has been turned off by mistake, but it's now been put on again. And our cathedral manager can do it from his phone because he's a long way away and it works. So there will be heat coming through. There's been a bit of a gap. It's a great pleasure to welcome Gilbert Markus to St Ninian's Cathedral. I've known Gilbert for a while, and he does many things. I think that's probably a fair thing to say. Teaches at the University of Glasgow and is a scholar in different areas. So, for example, at home we have, I think it's 5 volumes on the place names of Fife that Gilbert has worked on. And I think you're still working on the place names of Iona.
Iona, yeah.
Yeah. So it's Scottish place names and particularly saints in place names, but place names in general and Gaelic and things like that. And then Gilbert has also worked on the early Scottish church, but has also, I think for many years you've been thinking about this question of God and mystery. And so I think you're here to hear him, not me, so I will hand over, but the only other thing I will say is that Evensong is at 4 if you'd like to stay for that, and this talk and the discussion won't go on beyond 3:45 because we've got to get ready for Evensong. So over to Gilbert. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you, Stephen, for the invitation to come and speak to you. And thank you all for coming on such a beautiful day when you could be out rolling in the leaves or something. It's lovely to see you all. I'm giving talks in various places about this topic, God is Nothing, which is actually the title of this book which I published this summer. I'm trying to get people to think about the questions that I raise in the book and the kind of service this book might be to the church and to people more widely. The cover's got. Stephen said I should point out the cover. There's a crack on the cover. It's a photograph. In Edinburgh, I live in a community with a local email chat group. All the local neighbours, we all talk to each other on email. And I sent an email around saying, if you have a crack, can I come and photograph it? There are a lot of subsidence on the banks of the Water of Leith. So the crack, but it's meant to evoke a wonderful line in one of Leonard Cohen's songs. Ring out the bell which still might ring, forget the perfect offering. There is a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. I see some people mouthing along the words. We all know it, but it's the crack that the light comes through. And it's a line of a song which has haunted me in many ways, and some of what I want to say today is partly motivated by that vision of the crack, a break, and a breakdown, a collapse even. I've got plenty of cracks in my own house. I'm kind of exaggerating this anxiety about breaking down, but I'm actually doing engineering work at the moment to stop subsidence, so I'm a little bit traumatized by the concept. Anyway, let me start with a quote from Ludwig Wittgenstein, who in his philosophical investigations says this: a picture held us captive, and we could not get outside it, for it lay in our language, and our language seemed to repeat it to us inexorably. A picture held us captive. We talk about God a lot, especially in churches. And we use language, and our language is derived from our experience of the world. We call God Father, but the only meaning we actually have for the word Father comes originally from our experience of the male one of our parents. Okay? That the meanings of our language are shaped by the things we bump into in the world around us and the way we talk about those things. And then we decide which of those words and grammatical structures are appropriate to apply to God. We create a picture out of language. But there's something illegitimate going on in this transfer of meaning from our experience of things to speaking about God, who is unknown. I'll come back to this in a minute. And this is because of the idea of creation. If you'll excuse me for being a little bit autobiographical again, forget about the subsidence problems. Herbert McCabe, a great Dominican theologian in Oxford, taught me many years ago, in the 1980s. He mostly taught Thomas Aquinas, and even when he was teaching something else, he was still really teaching Thomas Aquinas. I mean, he was so haunted by Thomistic theology. And I must say that it is in his classes that I had the seed planted of this question about God as nothing. But his classes, his teaching was fabulous. It's one of those moments where, normally if somebody says something which is true, you find it, you give it intellectual assent. But he said things which were true, which were so bloody exciting that they aroused desire, that the true became the beautiful. It was extraordinary. He had a wonderful rhetorical gift, but a very powerful theological mind. And it was very exciting for me to be among his students. And it was all about, really, how is it legitimate to use the word God? And how can we escape from the picture that holds us captive and which restricts the ways in which we can make sense to each other about God? And there were two things that he spoke about in terms of his vision of God. The first thing was what he called the ancient Jewish idea, or the ancient Hebrew idea of creation. All the nations had their gods, all the nations around ancient Israel. They had hundreds of them, and they called them gods. They used the word El or Al or some similar northwestern Semitic language, which is where the Jews got Elohim, a plural form of the same noun. They were divine beings, they were entities, existing beings, and there were lots of them, and they lived and worked in the world. They dug the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. They gave birth to other gods. They had sex with each other, they killed each other. They got tired and made other gods to do their work for them, creating the first slave society, if you like. They fought each other because they were actually existing beings. But because they were actually existing beings, none of them could be the creator. The staggering invention of the ancient Hebrew Bible is the idea that everything exists is created. And you say, why does anything exist? It's all created. The answer to that question, why, is cannot be something which exists. Because if it's something which exists, it's one of those things which stand in need of explanation. It's one of the list of things which exist, which you're trying to explain. Where does all this come from? No God in that ancient Middle Eastern sense, no entity, no being can be the explanation of why there are beings at all. And the ancient Hebrews evidently wrestled with this idea. They knew clearly the older mythologies of Mesopotamia, for example. There are Mesopotamian stories about all these gods, Gilgamesh, Atrahasis, great sagas, exciting and quite often beautiful literature about suffering and death, about a flood which destroyed the world, for example, and the god who advises somebody to build a boat to escape the flood. But that's 1,000 years before Genesis was written. They're much, much older, these gods, than any Hebrew myth. But the people who wrote Genesis clearly knew them. But what they were doing when they wrote the book of Genesis was parodying them. Creating a parody is repeating something with a critical difference. And the critical difference, the parody in Genesis, is that God has no story. He creates the story. The story exists. It's the history of the world. It's the world itself is the story. But God is not part of that story. He's not one of the beings in the world, except in some other passages perhaps. But in the creation narrative, they've deliberately chosen to abolish all the gods and to bring the eternal one, the creator, out of the world into eternity as the creator. This didn't happen overnight in Hebrew society. There are lots of passages in the Hebrew Bible when the God of Israel sits in a divine assembly, for example. The Lord sits in the divine assembly and he says to all the others, "You are gods, and all of you sons of the Most High." So Hebrew literature continues to entertain the possibility, sometimes, of a pantheon of deities, much like the gods of the other nations. But there is this radical shift going on in Genesis, where a new vision is being offered. And it becomes a stronger and stronger voice in Hebrew literature as time goes on, so that by the time of Christ, there are no gods. There is simply the God of Israel, who is the God of the universe. Melech HaOlam in Hebrew, king of the universe. He's not the king of Israel, just. So what we see in the Hebrew Bible is the people of Israel wrestling with the idea of God, trying to escape from a picture, the picture which is painted by, there is a noun, it's a common noun, God, which refers to a certain kind of being, which behaves in a certain kind of way, slightly mysterious, a little bit powerful, and perhaps bigger than the average human being, but they're still beings, they're still creatures. And what Israel is doing is trying to break out of that picture, the picture that held us captive. And we have the same problem in English, of course. The word God comes from the Anglo-Saxon word Gott, which comes from an ancient Proto-Germanic word Gott, and they are basically just hairy-arsed forest spirits to whom you sacrifice horses, or river demons to whom you make offerings by throwing them in the river. They're not creators, they're just part of the world. So we have stolen the word God from these ancient Germans and their horse-sacrificing tendencies. We've stolen the word and made it mean something completely different, just as the Hebrews did with the word El, God. Okay? The same can be said for the word theos in Greek, which is where we get the word theology from. It means God. It originally meant a whole bunch of male and female figures living on Mount Olympus, or in the sky, or in the sea, whatever domain they happened to rule over. They were things in the world. They were part of the world. They were creatures, entities, beings, individuals. We've stolen that word and we've applied it to a mystery, the mystery of why there is anything rather than nothing, the Creator. That's the question. We look at the world around us from which we have created all our language, and we ask, not why is it like this rather than like that? That's a scientific question. Why is it raining and not sunny today? Or vice versa. That's a scientific question. That's a question about causes within the universe. But the question, why is there anything at all? Why is there a world in which we can ask scientific questions? The answer to that question cannot be a something, and it cannot be a scientific explanation. Scientific explanations only work within the order of creation. But the reason that there is a scientifically explicable world cannot be a scientific explanation. It's a mystery, it's unknown. It's that sense of awe that we have, looking at the world, looking at one another, reacting with it. That's what makes us want to say the word God. But that is not an explanation. Perhaps it's more like an act of worship. It's an act of acknowledgement of the mystery. So to believe in the God of Israel is not to believe in any gods at all. Not even one. I mean, if you imagine there were 10 Mesopotamian gods and the biggest of them killed and ate the other 9, then there'd only be one God left. But it would still be a being who was in principle part of the world, the same world the other 9 gods had belonged to. That doesn't make you a monotheist in the Jewish or the Christian sense, just to believe in that one individual. The oneness of God is not, as it were, a numerical oneness, like 1 rather than 10. It's the oneness of, for example, being completely simple and undivided and indivisible. So this reading of the Bible, which formed the first part, if you like, of Herbert McCabe's genius, which I find so exciting. The second strand of his thought was from his reading and teaching of the theologian Thomas Aquinas, a 13th century Dominican friar, whose huge literary output has had an enormous influence on Western theology over the subsequent centuries. And in many ways, obviously, being a Dominican, the way that Thomas Aquinas thought of God was very much shaped by his reading of the Bible, obviously. But he was wrestling also with his reading of Aristotelian philosophy, of Plato, of contemporary concerns in his world, and so on. And one of the fundamental part of this Thomistic view was his dealing with language. And he says, all our knowledge comes from the world. It comes from the world around us. It comes from our experience of things around us. And mostly sense experience, and then thinking about our sensual experiences. So that's where our theology must start as well. We ask questions about the world, scientific questions, if you like. Why does fire burn? Why did that tree fall down? Why does it go dark at night time? We look for explanations. But they're explanations of particular features of the world. And just like those ancient Hebrews, Thomas wanted to ask the question, why is there anything rather than nothing? It's not going to be, for Thomas, a scientific explanation. It can't be, as a matter of logic, a scientific explanation, because scientific explanations only exist within the world. He doesn't claim to know what the answer is. Thomas sometimes has I would say, a misguided reputation because of those so-called 5 proofs of God's existence, which aren't really actually any such thing. What they prove is that there is a mystery, that there is something fundamental which strikes awe in our hearts, which is utterly mysterious and unknown, and we choose to call it God, a word we've stolen from somebody else. Okay? He's not really proving the existence of God, he's proving the existence of a mystery. And it's the experience of mystery, the natural human question that we have asked, which confronts us with this almost vertiginous sense of bewilderment and awe, and perhaps even fear. So Thomas isn't using the word God as the name of some being. He's using it as the word for the mystery, for the unknown. And that it cannot be an individual being for Thomas. And it cannot be something we can understand, because what we understand are the things that exist in the world. Aquinas says that to know God, he says we can know God, but it's not like any other kind of knowledge. He says to know God is to know that we don't know what he is. That is knowledge of God. Knowledge of God looks like ignorance and the acknowledgement of ignorance. He says that in this life we are joined to God by grace. That is, it's a gift. We are joined to God by God's gift of himself to us. And in fact, he says, as Christians have always said, we become divine. We become sharing in that life of God, which is God. But we are still joined to God as to the unknown. Quasi ignoto conjungamur. We are joined to the unknown. So he has this profound sense of intimate union. That mystery does not make God remote and distant and unassailable. There's a profound sense of intimacy. We are becoming God for Aquinas. This intimate union. But that union doesn't take away our ignorance. He says we cannot know what God is, but only what he is not. And this is a really major part of Thomas's way of talking about God. There's a thing in Hinduism which I really like, where there's a kind of meditative technique where you sit there and go and you think and you contemplate things and you keep saying to yourself, neti, neti, not this, not this, not this, not this. But whatever comes into your mind is not what you're looking for. It's the process of removal which Aquinas is offering us in his ways of talking about God. Our knowledge of God is best described as ignorance, then. The word God doesn't refer to a known being or an individual. It gestures away from all that exists to the mystery which underlies the existence of all things. Another way of putting this is Aquinas says, Deus non est in genere. God is not in any class of thing. He doesn't belong to any group. If you made a list of all the somethings that were something, God could not be on that list. If you made a list of all the spirits that exist, whatever they might be, God would not be one of them. He's not a member of any class. So if you make God one of the somethings in your list, you've misunderstood the word God for Thomas. So we talk about God as a king, a judge, a warrior, a father, a mother, all kinds of things. But a list which contained all the fathers which exist would not be missing something if it didn't include God in it, because God is not a member of any list. He's not part of any order. Of all the things which exist, they all have relationships with each other. God is not part of those relationships. He lies underneath and behind and beyond and before all of them, but not as a thing in any kind of order which exists. Thirdly, Thomas has a strange discussion in the early part of the Summa Theologiae, where he wonders whether the word God actually functions as a noun, as it does in ordinary English grammar. Remember the picture that holds us captive. God is a noun, and that must refer to a being. But Thomas says, no, it's better to understand the word God as a verb, as operatio, activity, and the activity of him being himself. So he says that God is not an ens, a being, he is esse, to be. And he refers back, when he's talking about this, he refers back to God's self-revelation to Moses in the burning bush in the desert, where God says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I will be what I will be, or I am what I am. Which is where we get the word Yahweh from in modern, well, in referring to God, he will be, which is basically just the third person. He will be what he will be. He will be is him. He is him. Not a he, but an is, an esse. So for Thomas, God is pure act, pure being. All creatures which exist have, for Thomas, esse. They all have being of some sort, but they're not their own being. But for Thomas, God is not the name of a being which has being. God is the name of being itself, of esse. The fourth thing about Thomas is that because God is not part of the order of things, he's not part of the world, he's not one of the things which exist, he can't be in time or space as a being in time or space. He's not bound in any way by time or space. And that means there is no before and after in God. And that means that God cannot change. It doesn't mean anything to say that God has changed. Because change can only happen if there's a before and after. I was sober, now I'm drunk. Okay? That can only happen over the course of an evening, in time. Change is only possible for creatures. So is continuity. To remain the same, whether for 10 seconds or 10 centuries, also requires to be in time. You can't change and you can't remain the same unless you are in time. So God cannot change and he cannot actually remain the same, although we do actually talk as if he were remaining the same, steadfast, unchanging, and so on. Certainly he's unchanging because he can't change, but neither is he constantly remaining the same, because that's only possible for us. There are some things we can do which God can't do, and one of them is changing or remaining the same. Okay, so far that's all been a little bit abstract and a little bit theoretical, but I'd like to finish by thinking about pastoral and personal and community uses of this language, of this insight of God as nothing. Because for me it's much more than sort of speculative theology for its own sake. Partly because, and this, I would say this is at the heart of my concern in many ways, most of my friends, most of the people I love are atheists. My younger son, we went to a Catholic primary school, and when his class were preparing for the first communion in the class, he said he wasn't going to do it to his teacher. He was about 7. And she said, why don't you want to do it? And he said, well, because I don't believe in your God. And she said, well, what do you believe in? He said, I actually believe in Neptune. He was reading a lot of classical myths in children's stories, you know. He doesn't believe in Neptune anymore, but he would now call himself an atheist and a materialist. A lot of my friends would call themselves atheists. A lot of people, I've been involved in politics for years and social and political struggles of various sorts, and most of the people that I've worked with have called themselves atheists and have found it slightly strange that I'm a Christian. They think it's a bit weird. Maybe it is. Maybe it's just me. It's a bit weird. Anyway, but I ask them, because it does crop up, after you've finished photocopying thousands of leaflets to give out at some rally or something, or, dealing with some refugee that needs to get hidden away somewhere. Then you find yourself talking about what's going on in your head. And people ask you, well, why on earth are you a Christian? And I say, well, why on earth are you an atheist? And what God don't you believe in? And they give me a description of some being, some entity, some individual thing, which is bigger than me and more important than me and lives in the sky or wherever. And I say, well, that's an absurd description. That's not what Christians believe in. We don't believe in that. That is not Christianity. We sometimes do, I would say probably more so in kind of more evangelical American fundamentalist ways of looking at Christianity, that perhaps some justification. But that's not normative Christianity in any sense of the word. Christians think of God as a mystery. Christians don't think of God as a large, powerful being in addition to the world, as just another being alongside the world. They think about God as the mystery, inexpressible, eternal, unimaginable, who is closer to us than we are to ourselves, as St. Augustine tells us. Not some remote being in addition to us, but the mystery which lies at the very heart of us. So I can reply to these people, the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in. But I also say to them that we are in some ways allies. For a Christian theologian to speak about God is to say neti neti, not this, not this. To constantly invite people to return to the mystery, which is God, the ground of our being, the eternal nothing, the one who is not any kind of a thing. We call God a father, a rock, all those things, but they're pictures, and we have to be very careful about using those pictures, because those are the pictures that will trap us, that we will find ourselves and our imaginations held by and misled by. Once you've understood this aspect of ancient Jewish and Christian theology and faith, that God is not any kind of being, that God is, as Thomas Aquinas said, completely outside the order of beings. There can be no description of what God is like, because he's unknown. We don't know what he is. And in many ways then, the atheist is the believer's ally. The atheist is demolishing the idols, is questioning the images, and perhaps challenging us to be more careful about the way we use our language and all the images we use to talk about God. Because there is a real and bitter opposition to Christian faith and to Jewish faith, I would say as well. And it's not atheism, it's idolatry. It's the temptation to identify something, some existing being, or some force, it could be market forces, or some idea of your national identity, or race, or whatever it might be. Something which is so important that you will subject yourself to it, and also you will make other people suffer for it. I think there's a very close relationship between idolatry and human sacrifice. That other people will pay the price for you identifying something as having divine importance. There is nothing in creation which has divine importance. The only image of God we are permitted to have is told to us in the book of Genesis. God made them male and female. In the image of God he created them. That's the only image we have of God. The vulnerable human being. Let's think of a couple of other things that might shed light on... Have we been to time? Yeah. Yeah, good. A couple of other things that might, in our lives of faith, which Genesis and Thomas, let's say, God is nothing, might shed light on. Think about forgiveness. We have to forgive each other all the time. We hurt each other. I hurt my friend. She was my friend. She's upset. I've done something horrible. And I ask her for forgiveness and she forgives me. That requires her to change. She had to change when she got upset because I did something horrible. And then I asked her for forgiveness and she had to change again and restore our relationship. She didn't have to, but she was very merciful and did. So, okay. That's a picture. It's a picture drawn from the world of existing beings, from human beings. It's a picture we apply to God. And we start every day, we ask God to forgive us our trespasses. We've drawn that picture from human life, from the patterns of offence and hurt and forgiveness and reconciliation, which we are familiar with every day. Of course, it's not literally true of God. God cannot take offence at something we do. He doesn't change. Neither can he take offence and then change his mind and forgive us. The Bible uses that picture all the time, that God relents of his anger, all those kind of pictures. But they're pictures of God, just as much as God is a mother hen who's protecting its chicks under its wings, or God is a rock, or God has got long nostrils, as it says in the Bible, in Hebrew. It's usually translated slow to anger, but it actually means long nostrils. Okay. God as elephant. No, let's not go there. That's just getting too complicated. But people are worried about whether God is going to forgive them. They are sorry. Can God ever forgive me? This is a real pastoral problem. Anybody who's been in any kind of difficulty with, in a pastoral position, or just with your friends, or members of your church community, will God ever forgive this which I have done? But because this is not a literal description of what's going on, because God doesn't get angry and then change his mind and forgive us, God loves us all the time. God never stops loving us. It's his love that creates us, that holds us in being, and transforms us all the time. The only reason we can repent of our sins is because God has already forgiven us, because God has loved us eternally. His love is what creates our sorrow. It's what frees us from being trapped in our guilt and releases us into a return. Our return to him, not his return to us. He's always there. His grace and presence never changes. It is we who change. God cannot change. God cannot literally take offense. He cannot literally relinquish his anger. All he can do is love. It is we who change. It is his forgiveness that causes our grief and sorrow and repentance and return. Once you've got that in your imagination, you don't have to worry anymore about your repentance and whether God will forgive you. Because he already has. The fact that you have repented shows that you are already loved and forgiven by God. What about those who feel abandoned by God? There are people who, even if they believe in the existence of God in some sense, don't feel that there is any sense of presence or love or care involved in the way they talk about God and their relationship with God. They don't feel any sense of hope. Even if God is true as some kind of philosophical proposition, where's the hope in that? If God were a particular individual alongside me, me and God as two things on a list of existing beings, it would be possible to talk about him being present or absent, because it is possible for two beings to be present to or absent from each other. But if God is nothing or no one, but is rather the very ground of your being, then the questions of presence and absence don't arise. There's not another being alongside you who could be present or absent. There is simply God, the mystery, the unknown, the unspeakable one, who sustains you in everything. The fact that you exist and continue to exist is evidence of that constant presence. The God in whom we live and move and have our being, as Paul says to the Athenians, I think it was, in Acts. Or if questions about presence and absence do arise, it's not about any particular thing being present or absent, because the presence of God can feel like absence. Perhaps that's another way of seeing it. I mean, we know from the Gospels Christ's words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That was the experience of the absence of his Father. But the feeling of absence actually was I hate to say that Jesus made a mistake here. God had not abandoned his Son on the cross. The experience of absence, the experience of abandonment, dereliction, is also an experience of the presence of God, the God who, even at the worst moment, even at your last dying, agonizing moment, even at the moment when you feel abandoned, that is also an experience of the presence of God. In a sense, our experience of absence and our experience of presence are not diametrically opposed, therefore. Our experience of absence is itself an experience of presence. Can I finish with a poem? There's a wonderful Romanian poet. His name was Paul Ansel originally. He was a middle-class Jewish family in Romania in the 1930s. Both his parents were murdered by the Nazis, and he himself was taken prisoner and horrifically treated, but managed to survive the war. And continued to write the most breathtaking poetry in German, which is really interesting. He grew up in Romania, but in a German-speaking household. His struggle with the German language is amazing. He talked about German as his Muttersprache, his mother tongue, but he also talked about it as the Mördersprache, the murderer's tongue, the language of the people who killed his father and mother and tried to kill him. And that torment of dealing with the language, as he wrote in very powerful German verse. A lot of his poetry is addressed in German to "du," the intimate form of the noun for you, the informal, if you like. "Du." And he's looking for a "du." He's reaching out his hand to a "du" of some description. And sometimes it's a mountain, sometimes it's his mother or his other Jews. Very strange use of the word. He was influenced by Martin Buber, who famously wrote about the idea of God as a thou, a you, a du, he wrote a book called Iron Thou. Is that what it was called? Yeah. Ich und Du, or whatever. And it was an alternative, it was a way of seeing yourself in relation to a thou, a you, an intimate, personal image, rather than the I and the it, the object. There is no object. There is this do, this presence, which is not the presence of any being. It's just a you, which is kind of open-ended, left open. It's left as a mystery, as an unknown. Every Jewish blessing, there are blessings in Judaism for everything, for starting a meal, for finishing a meal, for encountering a hunchback in the street, for going to the toilet, for washing your hands. Everything has got a blessing attached to it. And they all start off, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe. He changes that. He uses the German translation of that blessing formula to call on no one. I'll read you the poem, so 16 lines long. And you have to remember his own personal history, Auschwitz, his struggle with language, his struggle with God and presence and absence, his struggle with the meaning of his own life, which he ended himself, sadly, by jumping into the River Seine in Paris. No one moulds us again out of earth and clay. No one incants our dust. No one. Blessed are you, no one. That's the line from the Baruch atah Adonai. Blessed are you, no one. For your sake we shall flower towards you. Do. And nothing we were, are now, and ever shall be, flowering the nothing, the no one's rose, with our pistil soul bright, with our stamen heaven ravaged, our corolla red from the crimson word which we sang, over, oh, over the thorn. We have become a nothing, and we are addressing ourselves to nothing. And there is still a do, there is still an I capable of addressing the you in Celan's mind. No matter how anguished or tortured that language has become. He never speaks of God in any kind of positive way at all, but he still has this do, which doesn't refer to any given thing, any being. It refers still to the hope of something which is beyond our understanding, that mystery. So I'll leave it there. I think I've rambled long enough. But I'm happy to talk about the ideas. Oh.
At the very beginning, you said that the word for God was God.
So the word for God was, yeah.
You said the word for God was God.
In German, yeah.
Does
Comes from
God in German, are there any other meanings of God?
Well, the original meaning was these forest spirits and horse sacrifice beings. That was the original meaning of the word. But Christians have stolen it and used it to apply to the mystery, which is not a forest spirit or a spirit of any sort.
I was watching a film on TV that they call Ninian.
Oh yeah, I want to see that.
It's about the judges.
Yeah.
And one of the convicted judges, he said something, I can't remember the beginning of it, but he said that God was in the sentence.
Yes.
I tell you that whatever he said had nothing at all to do with God. And I don't think it had anything to do with spirits. So I'm finding it very difficult to think that God came from God.
Well, it certainly did, as a matter of historical language. That's where it comes from. But, I mean, and when German Christians go to church, they address themselves to God. They say, Gott in Himmel, as they might, God in heaven. So it's perfectly straightforward use of the language. But my point is not whether Gott means God. It's what the origin of the German word was. In pre-Christian times, the word Gott referred to these forests, goblins, spirits, whatever you want to call them, who require, they might be helpful sometimes if you sacrifice a horse to them or whatever. They could be dangerous, but they were just other beings alongside us. My point is that the God that Christians believe in is not another being alongside us. He's not one of the things which exist. He's the cause of all existence, the ground of all existence. And can I just say one of the other things about this? There are two things we want to say about God. He's utterly beyond all beingness. He's not any kind of a thing. He's not part of the world. And you might think that makes him incredibly remote, because he's so utterly unimaginable and beyond all individuality. But it's, other individuals alongside me will never be me, and I will never be them. And there will always be a space between us, a gap between us. No matter how close I get to the people I love, there will always be some kind of degree of distance and alienation. Our intimacy, our union with each other is never absolute. But because God is not another individual, because he is, as Augustine says again, closer to me than I am to myself, he's the ground, he's the mystery underlying our own existence and our own heart. Because he's not an individual, he can be more intimate than any individual could be. He can be closer to me than any individual ever will be. So, when I talk about the difference, the distance, the unimaginability, the mystery, in many ways it is a language of remoteness, distance, difference, but it's also the language which makes possible absolute closeness. Yeah.
What bothers me about your position?
Sorry?
What bothers me about your position is its certainty, which I don't think you're entitled to. God is a mystery.
Yeah.
And I don't think I don't accept this view of language. And language is one of the words that we have to use. And meaning, I think, comes into us from all directions.
Exactly.
Not just from everyday life, but from all sorts of things. And some of us spend a lot of time thinking about God. Those of us who are professional theologians. But why do you accept, on the one hand, that God demands of us justice and mercy, and is not himself just and merciful? It seems to me that the language that we use about God, the talking about God, allows for that, and allows us to do that, even though he is a mystery. At the end, he is no thing. He is a mystery, and we should take that very seriously. Certainty with a mystery is not a thing that you can have.
Except, can I say, you're being fairly certain that he's a mystery?
Yes.
Which is what I'm certain about as well. Yes. And I totally agree with what you say. The certainty I have is the certainty of Thomas when he says, to know God is to know that you don't know what he is. It's the certainty about our own ignorance, not the certainty about what God is. Yeah? That's what I've been trying to say. And I'm sorry if I gave the impression that I was certain about God. I do want to say that God is just, but I don't know what it means. I know what it means for a human being to be just, because we act in a world of moral expectation. We have a certain nature, and we have relationships and a real world around us. And so human justice, we can argue about the details of it, but we have a rough idea of what human justice might look like, and mercy as well. And we're happy to say, in some ways, God is just and merciful, but we don't really know what that means in regard to God. The just and merciful God is also responsible for the children dying under the rubble in Gaza today. He's the creator of everything. For me, God is just partly because he commands justice of us.
Yeah.
That's how we imagine him. We imagine God's justice as the demand he makes on us to be just.
Yes.
He's also the cause of justice in us. He gives us the grace to act justly. And in some ways, because we can act justly, and because our justice is the glimmering of light, which is the light that we are called to participate in fully, which is the divine life, that our justice is already the beginnings of our godliness, our godlikeness, then we're entitled to call God just in those respects. What Thomas Aquinas would call analogical. So he talks about, for example, health. We know what a healthy body is like. And we can also say that there's such a thing as a healthy diet. Now, the diet itself is not healthy. The primary meaning of healthy is what it's like to be able to live your life healthily. A healthy diet is something which causes health in human bodies. And healthy urine, if you'll pardon me, this is medieval medicine, involved lots of peering into glass bottles full of pee. Healthy urine, Thomas says, is a sign of the body's health. The urine itself isn't healthy, especially if you end up drinking it by accident. It's a sign of, it's the outcome of a healthy body. So Thomas says, the way we use language about God is a bit like that. The justice of God is what causes justice in us. And it's the divine life which our justice leads us into. But we can't say what the justice of God means in regard to God himself. Because God is not a moral agent. Unlike us, who act in a world of social, of moral expectation, where we can either comply with or fail to comply with the demands of justice. God does not live in any world.
I think we can know a great deal about God, even if we don't know it, if it's a mystery to us at the end of the day. He demands, you say, and you repeat this again and again, that he demands of us, and the Hebrew prophets demand of us, that we are just and merciful.
Yeah.
And God can't demand that unless he is himself just and merciful. Otherwise, he is demanding of us what he is not in himself. And we cannot get away from that. He demands of us things that he has to himself, and that he brings to us and gives us as a measure of praise. Otherwise, why does he demand of us justice?
Because we are his creatures. And he wants us to share his divine life. And he's made us in such a way that the only way we can do that is to be just. To be just is to render unto other people what is their due. God is not obliged to anybody to render anything to them. He doesn't owe anything. He's the cause and giver of all things. He's not indebted to anybody. Nobody has any due. None of us have due things that we can expect from God because it's our right over him. So I totally agree that God commands justice. He also demands chastity, but it would be absurd to say that God is chaste, that he never has an involuntary erection. What would the hell that mean? Chastity is a human virtue which God commands of us. Justice is a human... Justice... Well, I think it's very practical. although it has an abstract dimension. But just as God commands chastity without being chaste, he also demands justice without...
Just as. Differently.
I would say, I can't see the difference between them. He also demands honesty.
Yes.
I would say God can be honest, and this very much part of the medieval tradition.
We're faithful to our wives and so on. So these are things that are in the human condition. Justice is something that he demands absolutely, and it is something that the prophets castigate again and again.
Totally, yeah.
People for, because they do not show justice. They are not God-like in this way. They're not.
But yes, I totally agree, but that's because they're human beings. Justice is a human virtue which God commands of human beings. And people sometimes chastise God because, like Job, for example, complained bitterly to God because he thought God wasn't being just to him. And God said, what do you know? Where were you when I made the hippopotamus? You know, the answer to anybody who accuses God of injustice, and they very well might, and they do. If you listen to Stephen Fry ranting about the horrible injustices that God has committed on his people, people do accuse God of injustice. But it's impossible for God to be unjust, and it's also impossible for him to be just in any literal sense, in a simple, straightforward sense that we apply to human beings.
I don't know what the simple, straightforward is.
Well,
we speak in a special way. We know we are speaking with mystery. We speak in a special way in theology. We speak with justice of God because he demands this of us.
yeah, exactly. We speak of the justice of God because that's what he demands, not because that's what he's like.
We've got a few other questions.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
I wanted to know if there was any good in your concept of the female aspect, because you gave no mention of
Yeah.
that whatsoever.
I mean, I don't know what a female aspect might be, to be honest. Or I don't know what a male aspect is.
Well, okay.
Male and female. I'm perfectly happy to use female pronouns about God. He is every bit as much our mother as he is our father, but he's not literally either.
I would agree that
Yeah.
it's very personal as to how you view that. I mean, I would, my own particular thought is that it's the complete balance between female and male. And that is something I would request.
I think, again, in some ways it's a separate type, but it's a similar thing. We speak about gender of biological organisms. People who have certain chromosomes and certain biological attributes are male or female, or intersex sometimes, whatever. But, and we use these metaphorically of God. Our pronouns about God are actually metaphors. And I'm perfectly happy to use male and female language about God. If you think that there's a balance between male and female attributes in God, you'd have to think about what are male attributes? Aggression, mansplaining, I don't know. What are female attributes? And it almost suggests, nurturing perhaps, or something, but they're kind of gender stereotypes actually.